Hi folks, my name is Ronan McLaughlin and I will be your host today as usual. We all know how critical our position is when it comes to aerodynamics, but we also know the challenges in aero testing and optimizing that fit. If you want to properly understand your aerodynamic position, we're looking at wind tunnel testing, maybe track testing, maybe field testing, if you have the tools and the time available to you. But all of those come with fairly significant barriers, whether that's cost, access, complexity, or just time. But what we're looking at today is a CFD offering that promises to make aerodynamic testing far more accessible and potentially far more iterative for all of us. Today's conversation is with Ingmar Jungnickel of Airo app, a company that sits right at the intersection of aerodynamics, bike fitting, and is something that feels like it could be a genuine shift in how we might approach performance optimization into the future. Instead of testing 10 positions in a wind tunnel over the course of a day, you can test 10 positions in his CFD platform in literally minutes. But if there's one thing I know about CFD, it's that it's complex, and especially so when it comes to cycling in the transitional Reynolds number zones that we riders typically operate in. And the difficulty also in just like simulating fabric interactions from our clothing and the effects from our pedal stroke. So while I'm absolutely fascinated by the Airo app, these complexities and challenges certainly raise some questions for me in terms of its usefulness and its accuracy and just how they deal with those challenges. So Ingmar joined us on the podcast to unpack all of that, and having spent the last 15 years working at the very top end of aerodynamics in cycling and Olympic sports, from the wind tunnel work with World Tour teams to performance strategies in speed skating. I'll let him explain it in the show, but he was part of something in speed skating that literally just changed the sport. So, and now he brings all that experience into a tool that's aimed at a much wider audience and made for a fascinating conversation. So yeah, let's head on over to that and get into it now. All right, Ingmar, welcome to the Performance Process Podcast. Thanks for joining us here today. Very, very good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. This is an episode I've been looking forward to. It's one that's unfortunately taken us longer to get to. I think we first planned it back in September, but we're here now. And before we do get on to talking about the Airo app, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, you can correct me on that if I'm not. Can you maybe just briefly walk us through your own background, please? I'm sure listeners may or may not know your name, but they'll certainly know some of the work that you've done in the cycling space previously.
Yeah, love to. So quick background about me. Name's Ingmar Jungnickel, from Germany originally. Spent the last 15 years doing cycling aerodynamics in different roles. This has been my dream all the way since high school. I went to engineering school in Germany with the goal to do cycling aerodynamics. Started a different company in university that did velodrome testing and outdoor testing, software and hardware. Started out as a side project with a friend. Then Alpha Mantis came out. We realized this could be a business. We'd built something very similar. Ended up selling that to the German Cycling Federation. They brought me on with FES to work with them on aerodynamics and posture. I wrote the bike fit guidelines for the German Cycling Federation as my kind of bachelor's thesis equivalent. And yeah, from there, built a relationship with Specialized. At that point, that was my absolute dream job when they had built a wind tunnel. Got in with them, worked a year and a half with us racing, traveled with all the teams, did all their velodrome testing, wind tunnel testing. Then moved to Morgan Hill, California, 8 years spent there. First working in the aero department, taking over the aero department. Lots of the bikes you have seen, whether it's the Venge, the Tarmac, the Schiff, lots of the equipment was things I had the pleasure of being involved in working. Then build out this advanced innovation group with them, looking into new projects from it. And on the side was consulting with the US Olympic Committee. We've had some projects there work out quite well. They have this tech and innovation fund. And they said, hey, if you wanted to start a company, we'd fund you if you make a halfway reasonable proposal. That was still one of the other big bucket list items in my life, is to start another company, see how far I can take it this time. This university aero testing project I shut down once I got the job at Specialized, because at that point, that was my goal achieved. And this time I want to see where I can really take it. And yeah, so this project is now called Project Slippery Fish. That was US Speed Skating's aero technology. They are currently in Milan Cortina getting ready for Winter Olympics. Mm-hmm. Really grateful for their initial funding and support. And from there, we took that technology back to cycling. And my whole career is now like come full circle 15 years later doing another aero positioning company.
I mean, there can't be many people on this planet who say they set out in university with the goal of getting into cycling aerodynamics. I mean, a lot of aerodynamicists in cycling these days have come from Formula One or somewhere, but you set out with this. What was the motivation there? Were you a bike racer yourself, or how did you get so interested?
Yeah, exactly. So my prior sport was competitive kayak racing.
Okay.
And I did it until I was around 16. And I went to nationals. I did everything wrong you possibly could do wrong, finished dead last. And that had two really big effects for me. One is I was kind of over the sport. And the second thing is I was really kind of obsessed about what had gone wrong there. Mm-hmm. And I was always a nerd, always into physics, the sciences. And so this started my love for sports science. At the same time, I was doing cycling as cross-training. Kayaking was out. I was getting much more into cycling. At that point, really more into triathlon, and said, okay, I'm going to do this different this time. Was reading all the sports science things I could find, both first on forums and articles, then more, books, like more academic books, academic papers. And what I found there was that looking at the physics, the number one resistance cyclists face is aerodynamic drag. But 15, 20 years ago, all the bike companies were talking about the weight of their bike. And when people walked into a store, they would pick up their bike. And that was how people would make a decision, is how long would the crank spin, how long would the wheel spin, and how heavy is the bike. And that made no sense to me. And it felt almost like this wrong in the universe that I wanted to write. And hit up at that point Mark Cody, Josh Pertner, Dave Kersel, all people I had the pleasure of interacting with later through my career. And essentially asked them, I want to do what you're doing. How do I get your job? And they told me not to do it. It's a terrible idea. Get some other real engineering job, and still stuck with it.
You ignored them.
Yes.
Well, I think we're
worked out okay.
I think we're all glad you did, because one of the projects that you were behind and helped create is the bike sitting behind you and screen here at the moment. That's the Venge, a bike that a lot of people would wish would make a return. But yeah, you were heavily involved then with Specialized. Take me back there. Like, what time did you start, or what year did you start with S Racing?
Oh, that's I'll have to give you a range. I should probably know the exact dates, but this, it's pretty much 10 years ago now. So it should have been 2015, 2016 that I joined S Racing.
I ask that question because I just wonder if maybe our worlds had overlapped unknowingly in the past. Because when the Giro came to Belfast way back in 2014, S Racing had sent a team to Belfast in March prior to the race to sort of aero map the team time trial course, and so I wonder maybe if that data had made its way back to you, but maybe that was before your time.
That must have been the year prior. I did a lot of this aero mapping work, driving a race course with an instrumented car, measuring wind speeds, all the things, and running computer models, similar to like the best bike sprint models. I did that a lot. Belfast was the year prior.
Well, maybe it's just as well, because I was very much faking it until I made it back then. I was unaware of my geography of Belfast is quite poor, let's say. So I was trying to figure out the route as I was supposed to be guiding the S Racing team around the route. So I think it worked out. You've since, you left Specialized, I think, around 2020 or so, and then you moved into speed skating and that. And I know you've been heavily involved in breaking world records and sort of reshaping that entire sport. Do you want to take us through what you did over there?
Yeah, that's been a fun part that enabled what I do now. And when I joined the aero department at Specialized, one thing that I missed a bit was this interaction with the high-end athletes and the professional side. I'd spent the last 3-4 years in Olympic level sport, either track cycling or then, through S Racing with the special sponsored Tour de France teams. And at that point, Specialized was the skin suit partner with Under Armour for US speed skating. And I was kind of the project engineer on that project. And Shane Domer, VP of High Performance at US Speed Skating, connected with me. I mentioned that I'd like to still be involved in high performance sports. He mentioned they have the Sports Science Commission, and if I wanted to become member, and then later he asked me to be the chair of the Sports Science Commission. And it's non-competitive with Specialized, it's speed skating. So it allowed me to do something on the side with professional athletes and high-end athletes. And the sliding friction coefficients are order of magnitude similar to rolling resistance coefficients of tires. DDAs are similar. It's an indoor sport. A lot of the technology transfer from cycling to speed skating is a great way to get a lot of positive impact there. And so we've been working together since actually around 2018, I would say. And the two main projects we had success in is one is optimizing the training there in Salt Lake City, where I live now, at around air density is below 20% lower air density than sea level. Most of their competition is at sea level. In speed skating, you don't have gears, so you have to actually change your technique and your biomechanics with skating at different speeds. And they had actually some challenges in adapting back to sea level competition from it, and how to model that out both from like the times. And we came up with a slow suit. So one of my claims to fame is probably to make the least aerodynamic aero apparel ever, with the purpose of slowing them down to sea level competition speeds. And that was the first project we did with them. From there, another one is we built a computer model of the team pursuit in speed skating. Team pursuit, time trial. Worked with the German team pursuit team in speed skate, in track cycling. Then worked a lot with Bolt Stolman's Quick Step for the Richmond World Championship. And then now in team pursuit speed skating. So these team sports seems to follow me around in different ways. And we built a new model there, and we showed that there's a different technique. So in speed skating, people used to alternate at the front, just like in cycling. And in speed skating, though, you're allowed to push the athlete in front of you. And with some math, we could show that it's actually much more strategically beneficial to stay in formation and share the work by pushing the athlete in front of you. We got the athletes to do it. We did that on a bike camp. That was the nice part with me, is I could ride with the athletes. We had all day out, and I think that allowed me to push a bit more of a crazy idea out in the evening. And they were willing to give it a try. On the first thing, the US team that was ranked 8th in the world with their A team had their B team go to a World Cup and finish 3rd on it. And there were strong indications that this was going to work. We had some amazing athletes and coaches that were willing to fully commit to this, saw a big opportunity. And since then, the US team has won nearly all the races they have entered. From that side, this year, they are unbeaten, have won every race by a more than 2-second margin in a 3-minute event. And all the medals actually at the last Olympics were won with the new technique. Wow. And that put me in the good graces of the US Olympic Committee.
It's a bit of a Fosbury flop moment, is it? Where Nick Fosbury wasn't it him who revolutionized the high jump, jumping backwards?
We call it the Fosbury flop of speed skating.
Okay, very good, very good. Yeah, that's you mentioned though that has sort of enabled what you're now doing. If we take this conversation back to the Airo app, how so?
So after that project, Mike Levine, who's the senior director of innovation at the US Olympic Committee, approached me, said, "Hey, we liked what you did there. We'd love you to do more of this. If you'd be interested, we have this tech and innovation fund. And if you write an application that's halfway reasonable on this, we liked your past work on this. Send us something, and you'd get grant funding. And non-dilutive grant funding is a really nice way to start a company, especially at the scale I'm in. I essentially had my first customer before I'd built anything on it. And I pitched them a project. That project was called Project Slippery Fish. Digital aero twin technology was one of the first words in this, and the idea was to create a 3D model of athletes and simulate the drag virtually. Specifically in speed skating, this was quite compelling. I'd done some projects with them in the past. Going back to the skin suit development, we've always done the wind tunnel testing at the specialized wind tunnel, but it's quite tough to make compelling wind tunnel testing in speed skating because they cannot statically hold these dynamic poses. So wind tunnel testing was always very unsatisfying. US speed skating does not have power measuring skates, so the whole inverse calculation, virtual elevation, Chang method things don't really work in speed skating for us. We looked at some other techniques and had some other projects about measuring wake deficit and pursued some crazy projects there as well. They turned out too complex. But then through Specialized, I had a lot of experience with CFD. I'd looked into the papers. Professor Bert Blocken out of TU Eindhoven is the main researcher there, who had really shown that you can run accurate CFD about the airflow around athletes. So we copied this model. We used that combined with our 3D model of athletes. And this enabled us to do these kinds of athlete tests in Salt Lake City where there's no wind tunnel currently. And we're able to work with the application, making really this aerodynamics workflow much more streamlined. And it enabled us also to experiment more. And I can touch on some of the other interesting pros of digital twins for aerodynamic testing, pros and cons, I should speak to. And that's a project that we've been using with the Youth Olympic Committee. We've since spread it to more sports. Commercially, I have the rights for cycling and triathlon. So this is what we now turned into Airo, my other spun-off company I'm doing with a friend, and we're selling this technology to bike fitters to help athletes do aero testing and aero improvements as part of their bike fit.
That kind of gets us to the Airo app. Can you, for anybody who doesn't know what it is listening to this podcast, you've given us a bit of background there on how you got here, but what exactly are we talking about?
Yes. So Airo is software that we offer to bike fitters and through bike fitters to competitive riders or performance-oriented riders, everybody that wants to go faster. And the way the app works is we create a digital twin of an athlete. This is a 3D model of an athlete from just a photo and a few measurements. Then we can digitally bend this twin into the baseline post, the same post that a rider has in the real world. From there, we can simulate the airflow using the same kind of peer-reviewed academic CFD that was in the Blocken papers and the same kind of CFD that I have experience using at Specialized. This runs on cloud supercomputers, I should say. This does not run on the local device. There'll be a fun side part, and this is the compute numbers, and this are truly staggering. And for the right audience, that part's quite fun. Then we can simulate the airflow around riders, and we can actually alternate the position of the digital twin, and we can try things digitally before we try them on the fake bike. So typical wind tunnel test, 10 to 15 positions. We can do that in around 10 minutes to create these positions, and we can simulate the air drag in 7 minutes per position. So in around 15 minutes, we get aerodynamics results to the rider without needing a wind tunnel, without having to travel to a wind tunnel. And we're also 98% cheaper than wind tunnel testing. And that together now enables us to offer wind tunnel or aerodynamics testing to athletes where before it was out of reach.
You've made it sound very simple there.
We try to keep the user experience for the fitter and for the athlete very simple. This was really one of my key learnings from the decade prior. Back then, we just said we want to make the most high-end system possible. In my first business in university, we were measuring tire temperature, front and rear, accelerometers, wind speed. We had 15 sensors, and we showed it to an engineering government agency, to the Olympic team. And they thought it was way too complicated. And then we realized, okay, if they think this is way too complex, we actually cut down a lot of it. And we've really learned since simplicity, streamlining, offering the features that people really need and getting it done is the much more important part in all of this, where I felt still a lot of these other aerosensor technologies have a bit of their weakness is the complexity and the time involved.
You mentioned tire temperature there, and I'm not sure if you've seen our tire testing article before Christmas. So that's if you have seen that, you'll understand why that's a rabbit hole that I have to avoid. But I'm very, very tempted to go down. But in the interest of keeping this conversation on point, I mean, is that the challenge you're trying to solve then with Airo, is just making aero testing more accessible to the general cyclist through bike fitters?
Correct. Yeah, there's really two applications where we see Airo really shine. For the professional riders, the Olympic teams, the Tour de France teams, all the more high-end people that we work with, we think of it as an exploratory tool. So you can test 50, 100, 150 things per athlete. And you can actually figure out what you should take to the wind tunnel. Often when you take a professional rider to a wind tunnel, they're taking training time away. You don't want to be overly crazily experimental with those riders. Let's say something tests faster, then it's really hard to stop the rider from doing it right then and there. Then they might injure themselves or overwork themselves, and they don't want to do the position. I've since learned that figuring out which positions to test should actually be kind of separate and done upfront before working with riders. And then that's more the execution phase. So on the professional side, we see it as an exploratory tool before wind tunnel testing. Wind tunnel testing for a professional rider is still more accurate than Airo. This is one of the things I should touch on. And you can do things in wind tunnel tests you can't do in Airo. What we can do, though, is we can test much broader and with very high repeatability. The other main part really commercially is being able to offer aero testing to all the riders where it was before out of reach, both from cost and time complexity. And there we can offer an aero fit session at a fit studio. Most of our partners charge around $200 for 10 aero positions. If I compare this to a normal wind tunnel session, you get around the same thing for around $3,500 plus travel. So we can offer aero testing to people where before aero testing was just out of reach.
Okay, folks, that's where we're cutting off the free version of this podcast this week. Just a reminder, if you head over to escapecollective.com/member, you can sign up now and you can get the entire podcast uninterrupted. You'll not have me butting in to cut you off or to remind you that you're not yet a member. And in doing so, you will be helping to ensure this podcast continues for many more episodes and months and years to come. So head over escapecollective.com/member now to sign up to Escape Collective and to get the entire episode of Performance Process along with all of the other podcasts and written content that we publish on our website.